From a studio high above the clouds of the Okanagan Valley, this is the Cannabis Podcast. Exploring the world of Canadian cannabis culture, one toke at a time. Now, here's your host and bud tender, Gary Johnston.
And this is my opportunity to welcome you back to the Cannabis Podcast. Thanks for coming back, or maybe this is your very first visit. If it is, well, let me give you an especially warm welcome. Ahead for the next 30 or 40 minutes, I'm going to fill your head with information about cannabis, a plant I am absolutely passionate about. Now, before we get too much further, let me remind you this program is intended for those 19 or older in your jurisdiction and is intended primarily for entertainment and perhaps educational purposes. You should always consume your cannabis responsibly. And in episode 159, we're going to look at whether Colorado is still leading in terms of legalization of cannabis. The CEO of Canopy is getting a little impatient with progress in the United States in terms of legalization. We're going to do a profile on a cultivator in the Kootenay Cultivar. And you may have heard the urban legend about myrcene and mangoes and cannabis. Well, we got a story that covers off a little bit of that. The founder of Cirque du Soleil was fined for some cannabis use. And Alberta has decided that they're going to allow white label for cannabis. And for those of you in Manitoba waiting to grow your cannabis, you can finally do it. The bill has been given royal assent. And on Cultivar Corner today, we're going back to Vancouver Island. We're doing some more orchard cannabis. Really enjoyed their granddaddy gelati. Well, they've got a new one, and it's Apple Flapjacks. That's coming up on Cultivar Corner. All of that and more on episode 159 of the Cannabis Podcast. And as always, I want to thank you for being a listener of the Cannabis Podcast. I so appreciate the fact that you are here. I also want to thank my supporters, Jordana, Kevin, and Jordan at buymeacoffee.com/cannabispodcast. If you feel so inclined, you can go there too and buy me a doobie if you like what you hear. And I'll also remind you that 1% of the income that comes in through that chain does go to climate change research. And I also want to thank my patrons at Patreon. Tony, Roger, Rob, Gage, Lloyd, and Mitchell. Thank you, gentlemen. I so appreciate your support each and every time. And I want to offer some additional support. Rob has been just a tremendous support. He's been a Patreon for a while now. He also supports me all the time. And just this last week, he wanted to check in and see how I was doing, saying he's still doing really good. Rob, thank you so much. He bought me 3 doobies. I really appreciate it, and I enjoyed them too. Thank you so much. If you want to participate, you'll find the links to both buymeacoffee.com and Patreon at the top right on the show page for Cannabis Podcast. And now, let's get to our first story of the episode. And for this story, we're going to mjbizdaily.com, and this is a contributed story, and this was contributed by Allison Jane. 10 years ago, there was no model for state-regulated adult-use marijuana. Colorado had to build its own model from scratch, with regulations for the alcohol and tobacco markets as the only guide. In the decade since, nearly half of all states have legalized adult-use cannabis, many of them following Colorado's example. Some emerging adult-use markets, such as Minnesota and New York, are working to improve on the initial weak points of Colorado's model, such as its lack of social equity. Additionally, policymakers appear more invested in helping cannabis business owners today than they have been in the past. But even those evolved approaches are still proving themselves out. So what can other states take from the good, the bad, and the ugly of Colorado cannabis? And how have declining sales in the country's most established recreational marijuana market changed the way emerging markets are approaching cannabis regulations? To answer those questions, it's important to understand why Colorado structured its marijuana industry the way it did, and how that model has since been replicated or altered, and why. If cannabis had truly been structured like the alcohol markets in 18 states, then Colorado's task force on the implementation of Amendment 64 might have suggested the creation of a state marijuana monopoly, which the committee ultimately decided was against the spirit of the legislation. Instead of using a monopoly to artificially inflate prices and curtail both illicit competition and consumption, Colorado implemented a 2.9% general sales tax on medical marijuana products, as well as a 15% excise tax and 15% special sales tax on retail cannabis. The distribution of those funds into state and local coffers for public school construction and other services won over skeptics and conservative stakeholders. In many regards, that approach was a success. By 2021, cannabis tax dollars in Colorado exceeded those levied on alcohol and cigarettes. At the market's peak in 2020, the state collected $425 million, affirming the argument for further legalization and rescheduling. the latter of which was recently propelled forward by the Biden administration. However, a contracted marijuana market can generate only so much tax revenue for education and other public services. It's fair to say the consolidation is a necessity for surviving in a market where deep pockets help marijuana multi-state operators weather volatility. Cannabis business owners and ancillary service providers alike can offer ample answer data to suggest high taxes have overburdened entrepreneurs, especially when policy continues to hamper growth opportunities such as a marijuana hospitality. In 2023, Colorado's Marijuana Enforcement Division, reacting to public input and outcry, tabled proposed rules that would have impacted consumption-friendly events and the state's slow-growing cannabis hospitality sector. Now Colorado lags behind Nevada for consumption venues, although Colorado voters approved an adult-use market 4 years earlier than their Nevada counterparts. Nevada's proactive approach to rolling out consumption venues already has earned the state a reputation as a trailblazer, although the first 21 licenses still are working to open their doors. Colorado also was late to extend the benefits of its marijuana market to communities disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. For example, it wasn't until 2021 that Governor Jared Polis requested $5 million to support cannabis entrepreneurs, including a business grant program for social equity licensees. That was 5 years after California and Massachusetts legalized recreational cannabis, with social equity programs baked into their state policies. Meanwhile, emerging markets such as Minnesota have fully metabolized the pros and cons of the now traditional cannabis regulatory framework pioneered by Colorado. For instance, Minnesota rejected the idea that marijuana prices should be kept artificially high to discourage consumption as a protective measure for public health. That stance means Minnesota's cannabis tax structure looks remarkably different from other states, with preference given to a helping legacy and first-time marijuana operators, making a strong start over welcoming multi-state operators or funding public education. Also, in the spirit of addressing the wrongs of prohibition, Minnesota's initial cannabis policy included automatic expungements for low-level marijuana crimes as well as some felony convictions. As the United States continues to go green, many new markets will continue to learn from Colorado's successes, not only in cannabis but in psychedelics too. Should the remaining prohibition states follow the Colorado model if they decide to legalize medical or adult-use marijuana? That's a complex question, requiring nuanced answers. Although imperfect, Colorado's model for marijuana legalization has been both influential and enduring, and Colorado has proved open to continued learning and growth, keeping the state at the heart of the national marijuana conversation. And that's an article written by Allison Jane, an attorney specializing in cannabis law, and we picked that up at mjbizdaily.com.
From the cannabis-infused studio in the clouds, this is the Cannabis Podcast.
And we pick up another story from the ounce.ca, and this one written by Pat Bomer. Manitoba's home-growing law has received royal assent. In April, the government introduced amendments to the Liquor, Gaming and Cannabis Control Act to allow Manitobans 19 and over to grow up to 4 cannabis plants at home. Home growing had been banned by the previous Progressive Conservative government. Manitoba will now align with the federal legislation on cannabis by allowing people to grow up to 4 plants per residence, Justice Minister Matt Wiebe said at the time. Jesse Lavoie, founder of Toba Grown, had been challenging the old rules in court. On Tuesday, the Manitoba government posted a list of laws passed during the spring legislature that had received royal assent and were now in effect. They included Bill 34, the Liquor, Gaming and Cannabis Control Amendment Act. If you live in Manitoba, you can now grow your 4 cannabis plants this year and enjoy the bounty in the fall. And it is about time. This story from 420intel.com, and I don't know about you, but I think I probably suspected that this was going on. Guy Laliberté, founder of Cirque du Soleil, has been fined for cannabis possession in Tahiti. A representative for Cirque du Soleil founder Guy Laliberté says the Canadian entrepreneur has been fined about $24,000 for cannabis possession in French Polynesia. Anne Donnois says a court in Papeete on Tahiti's northwestern coast found Laliberté guilty on Tuesday of possessing and using cannabis. She says he was cleared of any other infractions. Laliberté was originally taken into custody by authorities in Tahiti in 2019 over claims of cannabis cultivation. Lune Rouge, a Montreal-based entrepreneurial organization headed by Laliberté, said at the time that he was being questioned about cannabis grown for personal use on his private island in the French collectivity of islands in the South Pacific. The organization added that La Liberté was a medical cannabis user, but he denied any involvement in selling or trafficking of controlled substances. So there it goes. There, it doesn't matter how rich you are, how famous you are, whether you have a private island or not. People are still coming after you for your cannabis use. What a world we live in.
From a studio high above the clouds of the Okanagan Valley, this is the Cannabis Podcast.
And this story we're picking up from stratcan.com, and it was written by staff. Kootenay Cultivar is nestled in eastern BC, about 45 minutes south of Nelson, in the heart of BC's Kootenay region. I'm not sure I'd call that eastern BC myself, but I'm being a little picky, I guess. The Kootenays have long been known as a hotbed of BC cannabis culture. Kootenay Cultivar aims to leverage its decades of cannabis experience into long-term success as the industry continues to evolve. Licensed in 2022, the micro-cultivator and processor has been making a name for itself through hard work, attention to detail, and a unique array of cultivars. A focus on keeping things at a small, manageable craft scale has also been key, particularly as a self-funded small business, says Travis Hepner, the company CEO. While some advisors in the early days were encouraging companies to scale up and vertically integrate, he says that direction is often not sustainable. It's like any other business you're going to build, says Hepner. Start small and scale up. I think the biggest misstep of the cannabis industry was everyone was told to go huge, and in reality, growing small is the way to go. It's more manageable financially. You have easier sell-through as a small company, and if you want to stay private, you won't have the funds behind you to pay for huge teams that are needed to get your product to market. The limited allowable growing area under a micro does have its challenges, notes Tyson Carmody, Kootenay Cultivar's head grower, although it's helped them keep costs down. I think the micro model is a great model, says Carmody, who brings almost 3 decades of experience growing cannabis to the team. I think that, to us, it's the best one out there financially. But it would be nice to have a bit more leniency on canopy space so we can pheno-hunt more and play with genetics. That keeps us from doing much of the R&D we want. He adds that another benefit of their small growing space is that it's easier to manage and ensures they aren't building up too much product. Rather than scaling up large rooms, he says Kootenay Cultivar focuses on running small batches through their 3 grow rooms, focusing on new, unique genetics not found in the market. More variety, especially for the domestic market, is important. If you're producing 50 kilograms a month, it's going to be pretty hard to move that. The quickest way to go broke in this industry is to grow a lot of weed you can't sell. Every gram comes with a price tag that the farmer pays up front, and you have to float that until you're able to sell it through. That's a lesson that we learned, to make sure we diversify where our revenue is coming from. It's these kind of hard lessons that Hepner and Carmody say have forced them to refine their approach while still keeping the lights on. We're forever pivoting left and right to find the right move, says Hepner. All in all, once you figure out sell-through and diversify your genetics in a good rotation, even with the high taxation, you're going to make a healthy living doing this. But it's not an easy task to figure out all those aspects. Currently, Kootenay Cultivar sells its cannabis into the BC and Ontario markets through a few partner processors. He explains that another challenge for small growers and producers is how long it can take for provincial boards to offer payment. While large companies can better manage these issues, that payment can be necessary for small growers to keep moving forward. I think the biggest issues micros are facing is cash flow, explains Carmody. If provinces sped up payment terms, it's going to trickle down whether you're selling to another processor or doing it yourself. Having that cash flow available is key to survival. Despite these challenges, Carmody says he's very excited by the direction the industry is going, especially with so many unique micro growers who have transitioned from a legacy space. It can be frustrating at times to see where it could be improved and see it not being improved, but the government moves slowly. That's the reality of it. I'm still proud to be a part of this. I'm not going anywhere. I'm looking at this for the next 10 or 20 years of my life, and I'm excited to see what it looks like 10 years from now. We're planning on being there in 10 years and finding a way to provide value for the consumer, because ultimately, that's what we're trying to do. Sell a great experience to people. And it is true. There's been some fine cannabis coming out of the Kootenays for years, and pleased to see that Kootenay Cultivar has a stronghold in their part of the market and growing some mighty fine weed, and I suspect there's going to be some of that coming up on a future Cultivar Corner. And this is from the ounce.ca and a special written by Pat Ballmer. Private label cannabis products can now be sold in Alberta. Alberta Gaming Liquor and Cannabis changed its rules on May 31st to allow white label cannabis products, as they're also known, to be sold in cannabis stores. Private label means a cannabis product that is manufactured exclusively for a specific licensee. the Liquor and Cannabis Regulator explained in a bulletin. In its updated retail cannabis store handbook, the regulator says private label cannabis products, also known as store brand or white label cannabis products, must be listed at a wholesale price equal to or greater than the lowest general listed products than the cannabis supplier has in the same category and product. Private label products are subject to all applicable taxes, duties, and markups applicable to cannabis products in that category. No private label cannabis product arrangement between a cannabis supplier and a cannabis licensee can preclude the supplier from entering into another agreement to produce private label products for another licensee. Strip labels or stickers are not acceptable to identify private label cannabis products, and private label cannabis products cannot be used in an inducement. Only cannabis retailers who have been identified to the AGLC will be allowed to purchase that private label cannabis products from the AGLC. Calgary-based High Tide, which owns Canna Cabana stores and other cannabis labels, cheered the new rules. This is good news for High Tide's Cabana Cannabis Company brand, which is already in market in Ontario, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan, and for the newly acquired Queen of Bud brand, which is also available in Ontario, the company says in a news release. The company looks forward to bringing both brands to Alberta consumers as soon as possible. I'm thrilled to see the AGLC take action to join other Canadian provinces in allowing private label cannabis sales, says CEO Raj Grover. While Canna Cabana's size and scale will allow it to benefit from this announcement, other retailers will also be able to take advantage of private label sales, thus improving consumer choice and product differentiation within the legal cannabis sector. And I think this is a great idea, and hopefully we'll see other provinces get on board with this pretty soon.
THC, CBD, terpene profiles, what's in me? Oh, please explain to me. Cultivar Corner. Cultivar Corner, oh yeah, Cultivar Corner, please explain this stuff to me.
It's always nice to revisit a cannabis company the second time for Cultivar Corner, and that is what we are doing today. We have previously consumed some orchard cannabis. It was their Granddaddy Gelati. That's what we tried not too long ago. And now it's time to try something else, and this is their Apple Flapjacks. So I picked up 7 grams of the Orchard Apple Flapjacks. And the heritage on this one is Mac 1 crossed with slurricane, all of that crossed with pancakes. It's an indica dominant. My terpenes are sitting at 3.1%, and my total THC is sitting at 26.6. And I ripped the bag open and put it into a glass jar for some freshness. Oh my. The abundance that's coming out of this jar is just absolutely amazing. And this was one of the rare times of late where my weight has been bang on the money. 7 grams right on the money, exactly as I wanted it. Let me pull up my jeweler's loupe. Let's take a look at what we got for some of the weed here. And in my 7 grams, probably about 2 dozen buds, somewhere around there. Varying sizes. I'm pulling out one of the bigger ones here. And let's take a peek through the jeweler's loupe. Oh, what we've got here is a medium green, predominantly medium green, a significant amount of red hairs that are showing up, and a significant amount of trichome fields as we look at those as well. And in terms of the aroma, as I say, as soon as I popped up the bag, the aroma started to come forth. And as in typical fashion, when I then punch the buds, and start to break them up a little bit more, absolutely delightful. Let me get some description for you for Orchard Cannabis. At orchardcannabis.ca, that's where I'm picking up the information. And this is Apple Flapjacks. THC ranging from 23 to 29. My actual THC at 26.69. Lineage, as I already declared, Mac 1 plus slurricane combined with pancakes. Total terpenes or top terpenes are limonene, alpha-humulene, linalool, and beta-caryophyllene. And your aromas, orange, hops, lavender, cinnamon, and pine. I'll definitely get lots of pine on there. Some of those hops, some of that lavender. I'm not picking up much orange. I'm not picking up a whole lot of cinnamon, but that's just that's just me. Let's not write that off to anybody else. So let's break some of these buds up so that I can have my first toke of the day. It being an indica, but that's not going to stop me. Lots of stuff I got to get done today. So that is part of my plan. And in typical fashion, when we grind up the weed a little bit more, we're getting much more of those aromas. This is also some pretty sticky weed. I hang it onto my finger pretty much as I Stick my finger on top of that bud and try to lift it off my table and see how far she'll go. Goes pretty far, in fact. So I've got some ready for my joint. Let me get that in place. Leaving me enough to put into my Riser Air Max, into the little glass jar. And as I mentioned a couple of times, you got to be cautious with those little glass bowls because they get really hot. And if you mistakenly grab it when you weren't thinking about it, it can really, really sting the fingers. And we don't want to do that, of course. Okay, so let's fill up my Air Max with a lovely amount of Orchard Cannabis Apple Flapjacks. I just love the strain names, and we're having so much fun with them now. And let's, of course, get the Air Max up to speed. So what can we tell you about Orchard Cannabis? Let's take a peek at what their story is. Nature surrounds us with colors, aromas, and flavors that are both settling and euphoric. Orchard was inspired by the bounty that surrounds us here on beautiful Vancouver Island. We're honored to share our carefully curated products with you. Our values are the pillars of our community. Our values are the pillars of our company, as they encompass our duty to the land and our team. Respect, responsibility, integrity, and trust. We're a brand with a meaningful purpose and are passionate about connecting people with cannabis products that come with the highest quality inputs. For flower, we select only patiently cold-cured, hand-trimmed bud, loaded with frosty trichomes, imbued with rich terpenes contributing to opulent, fruity, and gassy flavors. And then they list their premium flowers. So we talked about them before. I've got the joint ready. My Air Max is getting up to temperature, so let's start with the joint. And this is some Orchard Cannabis Apple Flapjacks. Always like it when that first toke off the joint is nice and smooth. And that was some more of those piney notes, some more of those other flavors. What else are we talking about here? So lavender, cinnamon, pine, orange. All right, and here is the description for Apple Flapjacks, which I missed before. Get whisked away into the enchanting euphoria of Apple Flapjacks. Experience pungent terpenes with aromas of baked cookies, gassy kush, and fresh berries. With pancake lineage, you'll enjoy smooth and creamy inhales with a slight sweetness on the exhale. Make this your choice when exploring your creative side and getting immersed in nature. Expertly grown on Vancouver Island by Verte West and carefully processed and packaged by the Orchard team. Now, let's get back to smoking it. Definitely some kush. Definitely lots of gassy kush notes. And feeling lots of that. I'm not getting much of the fresh berries, but that's probably my palate more than yours. But really smooth. Nice gray ash on there as well. Let's pull up the Air Max and see what it tastes like. Oh, yes. Okay, so there's some more of that gassy kush, a little bit of the fresh berries, a little bit of sweetness on the exhale. Oh, but so much more flavor through the vaporizer than through the joint. Wow. Really, really enjoying that. And here come some endocannabinoid effects. Oh, yeah. Here come those euphoric effects. Euphoria coming on fairly strong now. Oh, I just love the taste of cannabis through a vaporizer. And not a surprise that Orchard has found another grower producing some really fine weed for them, Verte West. Verte West has produced a lot of weed for a lot of companies over the last few years. And they're now delivering the Apple Flapjacks to Orchard Cannabis. Oh, really strong euphoria coming on. Oh, nice happy eyes hit me now. Nice body stone. Yeah. Feeling some nice body relaxation happening here. A little bit of easing of some of those aches and pains. Always nice with a nice indica. So combination of Mac 1 and Slurricane crossed with pancakes gets you to Apple Flapjacks at a THC at 26.6 and terpene total terps at 3.10. It's a really sweet smoke, really tasty, really delivers on nice effects. Got some really nice high going on right now. It's in my head, but it's not making me muddy. It's still fairly clear. I'm moving into some nice body relaxation notes as well. This is going to be a real nice day. And once again, I'm off to the orchard. Or I'm coming out of the orchard, however you want to perceive that. Orchard cannabis from Vancouver Island, collecting and distributing some mighty fine weed. This is Apple Flapjacks, grown by Verte West. It's going to be a great day, and I'm back in the orchard. And as I often find myself, after the cannabis has been rolling around in my endocannabinoid system for a while, I turn the microphone back on and I say, yeah, this is getting really, really nice. Really enjoying how deep this is getting into a really nice body stone. My head is there. It's not muddy, so it's not acting like that way from an indica perspective. Really a nice body stone, head stone. I got euphoria. I got some happy eyes. My body's feeling good. A little relief. Yeah. Orchard Apple Flapjacks is flapping my world today.
Sharing stories about good weed while trying good weed. This is the Cannabis Podcast.
Our next story from MJBizDaily.com on Canopy CEO saying he's somewhat given up on the pace of U.S. cannabis legalization. During an interview with BNN Bloomberg, David Klein, Chief Executive Officer of Canopy Growth, explained that his business doesn't depend on federal legalization to work really well. At some point, the U.S. federal government will decide to completely legalize it and put a federal excise tax regime in place, and so forth. But we don't need that for our business to be functioning, profitable, and successful, he said. We need rescheduling, which is going to happen. Safe banking would be very helpful, and we're hearing really good things coming about as it relates to that. And the last thing that would be helpful, in particular for our structure, is safe harbor for the exchanges. He added that after these measures, 90% of the benefit Canopy would get from federal legalization will already be in the bank. Klein pointed out that Canopy is a relatively new company in a relatively new industry, one that sees changes that happen literally every single week. From our perspective, we feel that we just delivered a really strong quarter with growth in each of our businesses. We've cleaned up our balance sheet, so we have a really clean balance sheet at this point, with over $200 million worth of cash in our bank accounts and no debt due until 2026. He mentioned that regulatory reform will be happening in the U.S. and abroad, an opportunity that Canopy feels prepared for. The best thing we can do as a company is to grow and grow our operating profit, he said. There is a level of debt we can sustain, and maybe we're just about there. The best thing we can do is just execute on our business and look for opportunities to grow our operating profits wherever we can. Klein explained that companies under Canopy, such as Storz & Bickel, a manufacturer of vaporizers for medical use cannabis, has been a strong fourth quarter. They were up 43%, he said. Our international business was up 32% on the top line in the quarter. Our Canadian business was up 4% in the quarter, and each of those businesses is a standalone, a profitable in and of themselves. And then we have the public company costs that actually put a little bit of a burden on the business's overall profitability. Klein added that if the company was private, Canopy would be profitable today. Right now, the opportunity is growth, and using the capital markets to help us grow is super important, he said. The results of Canopy's U.S. business, Canopy USA, is not consolidated into broader business outcomes of Canopy Growth, Klein mentioned. When plant-touching businesses in the U.S. are allowed to trade on the NASDAQ, we'll be able to collapse that structure and consolidate altogether. In terms of lower yields, Klein mentioned Canopy is prepared to adjust to agricultural elements. So, the restructuring or the rescheduling of cannabis in the U.S. having some major impacts around the world, including here in Canada. And this is a story contributed to Stratcan.com. Mango? Myrcene boosts your high? Everyone knows it, right? It's scientifically proven. Ever heard of the entourage effect, bucko? I don't know who was first to alliterate myrcene and mangoes, but I'd like them brought to justice. The purported effects of mango and myrcene in popular cannabis culture have become so myriad and widespread that one might consider the fruit and molecule to be bioequivalent. If you spend more than 3.5 minutes on terpene TikTok, you'll no doubt recognize some of these popularly claimed effects attributed to mango and myrcene, and terpenes generally, and sometimes vitamin C, including but not limited to intensifying the effects of THC, reducing THC tolerance without reducing consumption, increasing blood-brain barrier permeability, synergizing with cannabinoids, and causing sedation and analgesia, the indica effect. And in the wake of mango mythology and entourage gospel grows an entire category of terpene-focused edible and supplement companies, stirring a cyclone of confirmation bias in a vacuum of evidence. Are mangoes truly rich in myrcene, as every single weed education and marketing blog ever to exist suggests? Not so much. And a bit of a sidebar here. I have fallen into this drama, this urban myth, this urban legend. I remember in my early days, I used to tell people, eat a mango before consuming some cannabis and it will help the myrcene get into your system. Maybe it was just an urban legend. End of sidebar. Volatile compounds in mango are present in concentrations ranging from 18 to 123 milligrams of fresh fruit, depending on the cultivar, of which there are thousands. Monoterpenes are the most abundant volatile compounds in mango, present alongside acids, alcohols, aldehydes, ketones, lactones, and esters. But despite popular claims, myrcene does not seem to register dominantly in mangoes. Available data indicates that 3-carine, limonene, terpinolene, and pinene are among the dominant terpenes in most cultivars. In one analysis of 25 mango cultivars, myrcene was detected in 3 and was dominant in only 1, in which it accounted for 58% of total volatiles. In the other 2, myrcene comprised just 0.5% and 1% of total volatiles. An analysis of the sap of 7 Indian varieties did include myrcene alongside ocimene and limonene, while in 9 cultivars grown in Pakistan, myrcene is not listed as present. An analysis of Bowen mangoes, which account for over 80% of Australia's annual mango market, found that myrcene comprised only 1.6% of total volatiles. A similar analysis of Tommy Atkins mangoes, which are the most extensively planted mango in the Americas, did not list myrcene as a detected volatile. Taken together, this suggests a fresh mango could contain 5 to 10 milligram total terpenes, of which myrcene is likely to account for fractions of a milligram. By contrast, herbal cannabis is more fragrant and contains more terpenes than fresh mangoes, with myrcene being among the most dominant. Total terpene content in premium herbal cannabis can comprise up to 40 milligrams per gram, chief among them beta-caryophyllene, terpinolene, pinene, myrcene, and others. Myrcene content in high-quality cannabis can range from 5 to 20 milligrams per gram, and it's present in nearly all cultivars produced for medical and non-medical markets where cannabis is legal. From 1 gram of herbal cannabis with 20% THC and 2% myrcene, we can approximate 1 gram contains 200 milligrams of THC plus 20 milligrams of myrcene. A half a gram contains 100 milligrams of THC and 10 milligrams of myrcene, and 0.1 gram contains 20 milligrams of THC and 2 milligrams of myrcene. Doses of terpenes added to edibles and supplements seem to be informed by cannabis and mango terpene concentrations. Indeed, the terpenes in question are abundant in most herbs and spices. Based on the order of ingredients on one popular brand of terpene-enhanced edibles, in which terpenes are listed last after what amounts to 15 milligrams of cannabinoid, I surmise that there are no more than 10 milligrams of total terpenes and likely less than 5 milligrams divided by 2 gummies, further divided by proprietary blends, which means no more than a few milligrams of each. A terpene supplement company with a large social media following advertising terpene portions for all your emotions, perfectly encapsulating their marketing technique, sells a dose of 15 milligrams of myrcene in its flagship 60 ml shot called Intensify. They offer a range of 4 other shots, each with 15 to 20 milligrams of blended terpenes, bookended by a product called Wake, which contains an additional 100 milligrams of caffeine. The rapid absorption and distribution of cannabinoids by inhalation would suggest the same is probably true to an extent for terpenes. Pharmacokinetic evidence also suggests this. The increased bioavailability from inhalation combined with a generally high concentration lends plausibility to the hypothesis that myrcene, and terpenes generally, may meaningfully contribute to the therapeutic and psychotropic effects of herbal cannabis. The pharmacology of pinene may also lend plausibility to inhaled terpene bioavailability, and the antibacterial effects of many terpenes may even shed light on the markedly lower morbidity and carcinogenicity of cannabis smoke when compared to tobacco smoke. But medical and psychotropic terpene effects remain largely hypothetical, despite droves of recursive anecdotal narratives influenced by dogmatic interpretations of taming THC. Terpene myopia is a case of the cannabis industry going full goop. Cannabis and terpene supplement companies feign innovation when in reality they are capitulating to placebo and pseudoscience, rebranding aromas and flavors as health supplements and medicine. If companies want to claim their added flavors have medicinal or psychotropic properties, whether overtly or covertly, it behooves them to fund the pharmacokinetic study, clinical trials, and peer review necessary to support the claims behind the marketing. Patients using cannabis for medical purposes should speak to a doctor or nurse about improving the efficacy of their cannabis treatment, not essential oil salesfolk on TikTok. Cannabis clinics and research centers exist for precisely this purpose. In the meantime, don't stop eating mangoes, unless you're allergic, of course. Mangoes are a nutritious and delicious top-shelf munchy food, great for anytime, anywhere, especially while listening to the mango song as performed by Fish. But also, don't waste your money on expensive terpene supplements marketed with naturopathic exceptionalism and influencer gimmickry. After all, your hands and feet are mangoes. You're going to be a genius anyway. Sounds intense. I don't get that last statement. Adam Greenblatt is a longtime cannabis educator, content leader, and thought creator, and he's the author of that article. I'm not sure that I entirely agree. I believe that I have felt some impact of the entourage effect with additional terpenes, and maybe it's not the terpenes, maybe it's the other cannabinoids. So maybe Adam's right. Maybe we are misleading people by thinking that the terpenes are adding different effects in addition to the taste. This industry is getting more complex, not simpler.
Exploring the world of Canadian cannabis culture, one toke at a time. This is the Cannabis Podcast.
I wanted to share a little bit of the details of what we did to celebrate my brother's life. My brother Bill, as you know, you've been a listener to the podcast, you know that he passed away on December 20th. Impacted the family really, really hard. He was the first brother to pass away. And we all got together in a little town in the interior of British Columbia called Silverton. Now, if you've never been into the interior BC, you're missing out on a lot. Just gorgeous country. As my son says, we're not living near the mountains, we're living in the mountains, and you truly are. Silverton, New Denver, Nakusp, Slocan City, all of those little towns, buried in the Valhalla Mountains, and just a gorgeous spot. The Silverton Memorial Hall, it was packed. The hall, I would say, probably held 400 people. I would say there was I'm guessing 350 people that were packed into that hall to say goodbye to my brother Bill. And I had the pleasure and the privilege of being the MC for the event. And it made me feel so good. It was tough. It was tough to get through all of that and to get through some of those emotions. But we did it. My son Ian, who of course you hear on the Cultivar Corner jingle, you know he's a good singer, and he sang a song from the Tragically Hip. I unfortunately don't remember the name of the song, but that's another issue. But he did a beautiful job. Even though we didn't have the proper equipment, I was kind of his human microphone stand as I held it while he played his guitar and sang those tunes. But we've had a fabulous opportunity. I'm going to finish with some words that came from one of my brother's friends, which were the words that he wanted to have on his gravestone, which none of us knew about. But I did want to also thank some of the people who were there, who are also listeners of the Cannabis Podcast, just like my brother Bill was. Jay, glad I finally got a chance to meet you, Jay. Thanks for coming over and introducing yourself. I so appreciate the fact that you're a listener and appreciate the fact that you're a friend of Bill's and you were helping him out a lot. Same thing with Siggy, of course. Siggy, a longtime friend of my brother's, and he used to go on a lot of the trips on the mountain with my brother Bill. There were so many years that they were together, and I never saw a picture of him. I never met him. I thought he was a figment of my brother's imagination. So I finally got to meet Siggy. Thanks, Siggy. I appreciate that. Also got to meet Jody. Jody, a neighbor and friend of my brother's, he came up and made a special point of saying hello to me. Thank you so much, Jody. I truly appreciate getting a chance to finally meet you and seeing some of the experiences that we go through in the Kootenays. Let me also thank Jill, Trish, Nancy, Lori. There's probably a couple other names that I forgot about because I forgot to write them down. But here's where we concluded. We had 3 hours of some fabulous stories about my brother Bill. We learned a few things that perhaps we didn't know before. Both of my sons got up. My son Sean spoke about him very, very eloquently because he's now the Mr. J in the Nakusp School District, which my brother Bill was originally. As I already mentioned, my son Ian sang a song for him. We had a wonderful time. I had a wonderful time bringing it all together and trying to keep it in some kind of perspective. And then it was my brother's friend, John McKinnon, who is a sculptor, works out of Nelson. If you get a chance to see any of John's work, he's an amazing sculptor. He had been my brother's friend for years. Now, they were not identical. They had a lot of disparity. They had a lot of disagreements. But they also were really, really good friends for a lot of years. And in one of their conversations, probably over a bottle of scotch or some other kind of imbibing, my brother said to John, you know what? Here's what I'd like to have on my gravestone. And John, of course, wasn't ready for the moment, and he teased the crowd at the hall that Bill had related the words. Now, John said the 4 words he wanted on his gravestone, and then he went off, and he went on, and we had some other people speaking, and people kept coming up to John and saying, John, what were the 4 words? We really want to know. And so as we were coming towards the end of the 3 hours, John approached me again, said a lot of people wanted to know what the words were, and I said, well, then we will get you back up here. So I did. I introduced John one more time, and he's now going to reveal the 4 words that my brother wanted on his gravestone. So John did. And once I heard the words, it gave me the conclusion to the event. And here they were. Had a lot of fun. Now, the first thing you may notice is those are 5 words. There may have been some discussion of whether a lot is a single word or 2 words. So I'm going to assume that John considered a lot to be 1 word. So had a lot of fun. And that just said so much about my brother. He did have a lot of fun. So I left the crowd with these thoughts. I know we all miss my brother so dearly. He was so very important to so many of us. But we don't want to live in that. We don't want to live in the sad parts of it. My brother would not want that. So what I want you to do is go away from here, and every time you think of Bill, remember, he had a lot of fun. What a fabulous ending. John, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the fond thoughts of my brother Bill. I'll still think about him often. Every time I do the podcast, I'm going to be thinking of him because he was an ardent fan. Thank you again to those who came by and said hello. Those of you who are listening to the Cannabis Podcast, please send a note. Remind me of who you are. And you can send that to info@cannabispodcast.com. Thank you so much for being there to share all the joys and treasures of the life of my brother Bill. And once again, thank you so much for being here. I so appreciate the fact that you are a listener of the Cannabis Podcast. And to reward your efforts, first of all, if you ever have any comments on anything that happened on the Cannabis Podcast, or you have some suggestions for future episodes, please send a note to info@cannabispodcast.com. And now to reward your efforts and thank you for being a listener, let me finish off with my proverbial bit of cannabis puns and bring a chuckle to your face. Why did the cannabis plant get a gym membership? It wanted to work on its joint flexibility. What do you call a cannabis plant that's a fan of science fiction? An extraterrestrial plant. Why did the stoner bring a ladder to the art gallery? He heard the paintings were elevated. What do you call a stoner who loves fishing? A master baiter. And on that groan, we will call it a conclusion. Thank you so much for being here. That's it for episode 159 of the Cannabis Podcast.
From the cannabis-infused studio, high above the Okanagan Valley, this was the Cannabis Podcast.
Thanks for listening to today's show. To check out more great cannabis podcasts, go to podconnects.com. Here's a preview of one of our other shows.
How do cannabis CEOs balance growth and optimization strategies? What is THCO, Delta-10, and CBNA, and why should you care about these minor cannabinoids? And why isn't the endocannabinoid system covered in medical school? Most people think they're up to date in trends in the cannabis industry, but they're about 6 weeks behind. Learn about what is truly next in the cannabis space by joining myself, Brian Fields, and Kellen Finney every week on the Dime Podcast and, of course, on PodConnects.